very much. Friends, fellow Singaporeans, last night my mother heard about my Mandarin speech and strongly suggested I say something in Tamil. Now that is very hard for me, as my Tamil is hopeless. I did Chinese as a second language, 华语是我的第二语文. But every holidays, every time there's school holidays, my parents would hire a Tamil tutor to teach me Tamil. And these tutors were all scholars. So they would teach me classical Tamil. And in my youth, I could not appreciate it. In fact, I had to have a lot of help from my teammate, Mr. Sadasivam. But I'm going to try, so please forgive me. Okay? Va kalagalahe, en per Paul Tambyah. Nan Singapore Palkalai Karagadil per Asriagra Pani Asriguren. Nan Singapore Janayaga Kachian Vet Palaraga Poti Iduguren. Singapore Jananayaga Kachian Kol Gaigalai Nan Mulamayaga Asrikiren. Singapore Ura Jananayaga Mana Samuda Vamika Nadaga Matra Nangal Viragarom. And the Vida Ina Mura Mada Veru Padmilada Panakrara Erai Endra Pagupadam Ilada Nadaga Singapurai Uruvaka Vendum Nandri. Okay, Mom, so I tried. For the rest of the talk, I'm going to go in English. Okay, before I go into the substance of my talk, I'd like to review some of the points raised by the PAP during their rallies last night. As you know, the SDP has decided to run a clean and fair campaign. And the tone was set by Dr. Chi himself. And we had initially hoped that this would be the case for our opponents too. To be fair to them, late last night, two of them removed some of the most embarrassing posts from their own Facebook pages, suggesting that they too realized the value of a clean and fair campaign. But unfortunately, the internet is unforgiving. In any case, this election is all about you, the voters. It's not about taking pot shots or preserving the power of a ruling elite, nor even about an alternative government, as the largest opposition party in this campaign has only got 28 candidates. But this is really all about you, a chance for the electorate to give a report card to the government, a chance for you to decide your future. The Singapore electorate is mature and intelligent. Recent elections have shown that the people of Singapore will vote strategically, and we will all have to listen to you, what you, the people, say, both to the PAP as well as to the alternative parties. And that is what democracy is all about. Democracy is what gave us the first generation of Singapore leaders. The PAP team in the 1960s faced a strong and lively opposition before Operation Cold Store. And this resulted in some of the best public policy that Singapore has ever seen. The expansion of public housing, the widespread provision of free healthcare into every kampong in Singapore that raised Singapore's public health standards, as well as expanded education and industrialization. The PAP leadership of those days had to convince their opponents in the other side of the house how good their policies were before they could be implemented. That was the old PAP. Singaporeans put up with some of their draconian excesses because they delivered the goods. I'm not so sure about today's PAP. Are you? The PAP we heard about yesterday seem to channel their insecurities into scaremongering, as if they were trying to frighten the electorate into voting for them. We saw on the front page of the Straits Times about how the PAP might lose the election. Now look, the SDP has only got 11 candidates in this election. 11 very good candidates, I must say. We aim to be your voice in Parliament, to get into Parliament, to ask good questions, to demand transparency and accountability, like Dr. Wong Suk Yi talked about, from the PAP government. We cannot form the next government with 11 candidates. We cannot even implement some of those so-called dangerous policies that we have proposed, as we will be outvoted easily if we propose a motion on any of them. We can, however, use these policies as a benchmark to judge and assess the performance of the PAP. We can constantly keep reminding the PAP that public housing is about providing a roof over our heads, not some kind of asset for speculation that must appreciate, that we can monetize when we get sick. Schools should be places for children to grow and develop, not places where they get stressed out, hot-housed, in high-stakes standardized exams like the PSLE. And that all Singaporeans should be treated with fairness and equality, regardless of ethnicity or religion. The people can decide on Friday for themselves how dangerous they think these policies are. So moving on to equality, it's worth remembering, as some of you may not, that in 2002, Dr. Chee Soon Juan spoke at Hong Lim Park on the right to wear tudongs, and he was fined $3,000 for his effort. Dr. Chee said at the time, "I admit that it's not a popular thing to do, but sometimes it's important to do the right thing rather than what is politically expedient." We are Singaporeans, first and foremost, and what is unfair to Singapore Malays is also unfair to all Singaporeans. Similarly, Dr. Chee said, Singaporean Malays, Indians, and Eurasians should speak up for Singaporean Chinese if they are unfairly treated. That commitment to a truly multiracial and diverse Singapore is one of the reasons why I joined the SDP. In our hospitals, we've got doctors, ward clerks, and many allied health professionals wearing the hijab and serving with distinction. It's hard to understand why nurses cannot. In fact, as my teammate Daman pointed out earlier on last week, Madam Halima, Dr. Intan, and Madam Rahayu look so distinguished in their white tudongs. In fact, they look like angelic nurses. Last night, there was also a vigorous defense of the 6.9 million population target, with Minister Balakrishnan being quoted as saying, "My greater fear is that our population will never reach much beyond 6 million, because if your fertility rate is low and your economy is not booming and people don't want to come, you won't have a problem of worrying about 6 million. The greater threat is stagnation, aging, and shrinking." Putting aside the alarmist scenarios, I personally think that the minister needs to spend more time in the real world instead of home visits once every 4 to 5 years. My wife and I like to stay in Singapore during the long weekends because we estimate that about 1 million people leave Singapore for our neighboring countries, especially with the strong Singapore dollar. So Singapore is a great place to live with about 3.5 to 4 million people. The traffic is better, the shops are less crowded, we can even get decent seats in the movie theater. And I think that most Singaporeans would favor a more sustainable growth model rather than the PAP's obsession with growth for the sake of growth. There was also some concern in the rallies about the SDP's healthcare plan and about how this would erode our defense capability. As I mentioned yesterday, we want smart defense spending, where programs such as the F-35, this is the fighter plane which some people have called the plane which cannot fight, can be scrutinized and evaluated. But today, I think we should consider an even greater shift. We recognize that Singapore needs to have a very highly publicized, large budget defense figure to send a message to any would-be aggressors, which Mr. D'Souza was asked about last night. One way to do that, while protecting the lives and well-beings of all Singaporeans, would be to put the Ministry of Health under the Ministry of Defense, total defense. That way, money can be released for the National Health Insurance Fund while preserving the high defense budget figures for public consumption. After all, every day, more Singaporeans die of heart disease than were killed during Konfrontasi. Every year, more Singaporeans die of cancer than died during the Japanese occupation. We need to defend our citizens against threats, both external to the body and internal. I know that this is quite unheard of anywhere in the world, but in our unique Singapore, we should not be afraid of taking bold steps for the good of our people. While the cultures of the two ministries are also quite different, I know many people in MOH who would relish the resources and efficiency of MINDEF. Finally, this afternoon at the Boat Quay rally, we saw the image of someone carrying a carrot. It struck a chord in many people, a giant orange carrot. Many people are afraid that if the PAP loses an SMC or GRC, that amenities will be withdrawn. Now, I can reassure you, the PAP is neither all-powerful nor is it evil. Despite the threat that the citizens of Aljunied would live to repent their choices, the MRT still runs in Aljunied. It's on the east-west line. It wasn't affected by the Nell breakdown today. Serangoon Gardens still has Chom Chom and other delightful eateries. Lift upgrading continues, and life goes on despite the endless debates about the accounts. Our civil service is professional, competent, and non-partisan. They will continue to provide you with the services you need regardless of who you, the voters, decide to elect on Friday. I assure you. This election, however, is about more than policies and programs. It is about values. As I've mentioned before, I joined the SDP because I shared its commitment to social justice. My commitment to social justice comes largely from my parents. My mother used to repeatedly quote from Proverbs 31 in the Bible, where it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." This has been the theme of this campaign. Many people have contacted us through this week and last week with their stories, which have often been heartbreaking. I would like to say to all of you who have shared your stories with us, I wish we could speak up for all of you, but we only have 9 days for this campaign. We promise that if we are elected, we will continue to speak up and ask good questions in Parliament. I am going to, however, highlight 2 stories tonight. The first is from a friend, and she got very shy about it. She didn't want me to identify her. Last night, she shared with me a concern she had raised with one of the ministers of state. She said, "I have heard this claim that MOE has provided most schools for help with kids with learning disabilities since my son, who is dyslexic, was in P1. But I haven't experienced anything that you promised. he is now preparing for his PSLE 6 years later. With a strong voice in Parliament and a clear education policy as a benchmark, I promise her that we would keep asking the ministry to keep their promises on the ground to real world, to real parents and real children alike. The second story is even more heartbreaking. A mother wrote to me about her daughter, who is less than 2 years old and has a chronic illness. She needs specialized medical therapy, which costs about $5,000 to $8,000 a month. The treatment is given in most places as an outpatient. But if this was the case here, the parents cannot use their own MediSave or MediShield, or even MediShield Life when it kicks in later this year. The hospital has been very good and has tried to work something out for them, but they keep failing the means test, which would give them access to MediFund. They, like so many Singaporeans, are caught in between. They are not poor enough to qualify for the complicated means-tested assistance schemes. At the same time, they're not rich enough to be able to comfortably deal with these very high medical bills. As I've said before, Singapore has very good medical care. In another Southeast Asian country, this child would not have survived. But the child is doing well. But the family has spent a lot of their savings, and they're trying very hard to provide the best for her while not neglecting her older siblings. The mother came to the rally at Toh Guan Road last night and spoke to me. She volunteered to come on stage tonight. But this afternoon, however, she sent me a message. She said she was struggling with this. And so I said it was all right. I would just tell her story and she doesn't need to worry. She replied poignantly, and I quote, "It's not okay. Suffering, and don't even dare to complain. It's really very painful." She's here in the audience tonight, and I promised her that I would tell her story regardless. And if elected, we would continue to raise these voices and messages in Parliament. It is for people like this mother and her family that I step forward from the comfortable world of being a university professor and a senior doctor to get involved in politics. Politics is about people. We have to put people above profits. This Friday, you can make a difference. Tell your friends and relatives and neighbors, vote for the SDP to be your voice in Parliament. Thank you.